Okay, here's what I'm going to be talking about. I'll give you some background information on the Smoky region. We'll talk a little bit about the challenges ahead, and then I'm going to leave the researchers with one key message. And the disclaimer at the bottom, I think you'll find that I am a little bit biased in my approach to some stuff. Okay, so this is not a federal map. This is a map of Alberta. And the Smoky region is the one that's highlighted there in green. And the region encompasses the MD of 16, the Saddle Hills and Grande Prairie counties, Weyerhaeuser Canada FMAs, as well as the volume tenures for Ainsworth, Toco, and Foothills forest products. So this is a more detailed look at the Smoky region. The Weyerhaeuser FMA is the one in that, I guess we'll call it chocolate brown. It's management unit G16. Canfor is showing up as that lighter colored brown G15, and Foothills forest product gets their volume out of management unit E8 down at the bottom of the slide there. And Toco and Ainsworth operate both in Weyerhaeuser and Canfor's FMAs. Okay, this busy slide. So first we'll take a look at the map on the right, and maybe to try to kind of center you here, the town of Grande Prairie, or the city of Grande Prairie I should say, is that little yellow dot right in the middle. And the boundaries of all the various management units that are part of the Smoky region are highlighted in dark black. And it doesn't show up really well on this slide. But what this slide is showing is the pine stand connectivity. And the colors aren't coming out really clear there. So let me just make the point that the stands that are highlighted in red are the ones that are highly connected. So the area of most concern for us are the areas to the south and southwest of Grande Prairie. If we take a look at the stats on the region overview, the 72 million cubic meters is probably a conservative volume estimate. But even with that conservative volume estimate, that represents about 25 years worth of allowable annual cut at the current cut levels for the 3 conifer producers. So we've got over 500,000 stands out there, hectares of stands out there, where pine is at least some component of that stand, and about 250,000 hectares where the stand susceptibility index is relatively high. From a historical perspective, okay, so not much happened prior to 2005, and then in 2005, I think it was 20 trees were found on the southwest corner of our FMA, and we thought, oh my God, the world has ended. Beetle is finally here. And then we got really shocked the next year when we had that inflight from BC. The most impacted area was the area north, west, and immediately south of the city of Grande Prairie. Then along came the inflight in 2009 that made the 2006 inflight look like peanuts. An indication of how the infestation has grown through time is reflected in the control numbers from the Smoky region, the ESRD Smoky region, number of trees that they've controlled using level 1 and the modified bunch and burn. And you can see that, you know, the numbers have increased year after year after year after year. If we factor in, do like a rough estimate of the number of trees that were controlled using that modified level 1 or the bunch and burn, it comes out to about 1 million trees in the region have been controlled. Okay? I didn't put this number on the slide, but in terms of total volume that's probably been impacted in our region to date, well, I don't have that number, but I can give you a guesstimate for the Weyerhaeuser FMA, which is about half the region, is probably in the range of about 2.5 million cubic meters. And this is what it looks like today. So this is in the north half of the region. This is about 40 or 50 kilometers south of Grande Prairie. And what you can see there is virtually every mature pine tree is dead. That's the bad news. The good news is, to date, it hasn't gotten into the region in any significant manner. And another shot of one of our operating areas to the west of Grande Prairie. This one's located about 70 kilometers south of Grande Prairie, as is that one. And then as one gets a little bit further south and starts going up in elevation, we start to see that the infestation is getting more scattered. I'm not sure how well if you look hard in that screen, you can start to see little pockets of 2 and 3 trees scattered about. And this is about 100 kilometers south of Grande Prairie. And then finally, when we get down at the very south end of the planting area, basically the infestation is non-existent. Now, the interesting thing about this particular slide is that after the 2006 infestation, there were red trees on the landscape here, and the population just didn't go anywhere there. So at the higher elevations, what we're seeing is that the beetle's not doing terribly well. So the challenges ahead. Well, everything runs on money, right? And so that, of course, is one of the challenges. Are we going to continue getting that funding into the future? If we take a look at what the province has spent or committed on control work since 2007, you know, the trend is that it's gone down. So that's the bad news. The good news, though, is that at least they've recognized the need to put money into that rehabilitation account, and having that 10 million infused in there is really positive. But we all know, you know, the pressures that the government is under to control spending going into the future. And in the back of my mind, I always worry about, okay, what are the people in Calgary thinking? And are they convinced that the battle for the beetle has been won because they don't see it down in their neck of the woods, or because they watch TV and they've been told that the battle is lost? So why bother spending more money on beetle control when we've got health, education, other priorities to direct that money towards? Timber supply impacts, and this is one of those topics that's near and dear to my heart. So we are forecasting a conifer AAC reduction, and it could be as high as 35% by 2023. And that fall down is a result of two things. One is, yeah, we have gone on a surge cut for pine since about 2006. So part of that fall down is simply a natural outcome of harvesting above, you know, the ongoing sustainable levels. But the bigger reason for that fall down is going to be unsalvaged mortality. And that unsalvaged mortality is going to come in sort of two ways. One, in some instances, we're going to lose entire stands. So we're not only losing the existing growing stock, but we're also going to be, you know, losing productivity from those stands for some period of time, unless, as we talked earlier this morning, we do some sort of intervention on those stands. The second place that we lose mortality is when we do go in to do salvaging. Some portion of those trees are unusable. They simply have been dead and standing for too long, and we can't use them, whether they're part of a pine stand that we're salvaging, or later in the future when we go after spruce stands as a component of those spruce stands. Not only are we losing AAC in the future, but there's also a great deal of uncertainty around how much will we actually lose, both in the short term and in the long term. And I've listed some factors, questions, assumptions, whatever you want to call them, that are going to be impacting that uncertainty. And so these are the type of assumptions that we as industrial foresters and timber supply modelers and forest managers, we have to make assumptions about these going forward. And so we're making decisions based on our assumptions around these. From a research viewpoint, these are the type of questions that we need help with. So is our future timber supply going to look like that? Or is it going to look like this? Still a whole bunch of uncertainty around that. So, why is this important? Well, obviously, you know, the key question is there enough wood to run the facilities? Okay, so in our region, we have 3 sawmills and a pulp mill that depend on timber supply from this area. And it's not just a matter of, is there going to be enough wood to run them, but is there going to be enough certainty around that wood supply to be able to attract investment into those facilities, to modernize them, to keep them competitive on a global viewpoint. And those questions not only impact business sustainability, but they also impact people in the local community, because at the end of the day, you know, if we have to start closing facilities or start cutting back on facilities, that impacts people. That impacts people that work in the mills, people that work in the bush, people that depend on the forest industry. So at the end of the day, this mountain pine beetle impacts not just the forest, but it's the people and their livelihoods that live and work in those communities. So what are we doing to try to offset some of those AAC losses? First thing that we've done is prioritize stands to try to minimize losses to the beetle. And so we went through a very similar regional modeling exercise that the central region did to try to make sure that the industry is really going after the high priority stands where it's going to do the most good. We try to coordinate our activities with the SRD control activities to make sure that we're maximizing our harvesting power. We put a high focus on making sure that we avoid stands with a high spruce volume content. We typically use a ratio of about 50%. If it's got more than 50% spruce in the overstory, let's park it, let's come back and save that stand for a future date when we need the spruce volume out of it. Same thing with spruce understories. In terms of stands that have a significant spruce understory to them, we're looking at retaining those stands on the landscape for the future. And this is really also coming down to making your harvesting power effective. You've only got, you know, there's only so many trees a buncher can harvest in a year, and every spruce tree that you go after is a spruce tree you don't have for the future, but it's also at least one pine tree that you probably aren't going to get, that isn't going to be salvaged, or maybe more if that pine tree was infested with beetles, and if you harvesting that could have prevented those beetles from getting out and going across the landscape. The last point under that one is salvaging stands before they become unusable. So the idea behind that is, let's get to those stands, let's harvest them, and then let's do the usual reforestation treatments to get that land back into production. And we've really had some good cooperation in the region around that. So as an example, this year on Weyerhaeuser's forest management area, we actually had Canfor and Ainsworth come in and harvest and utilize in their facilities stands that have been killed by beetle and that we just couldn't get around to getting to. The second thing we're doing is looking at starting to work on the improvements to allowable annual cuts that we need for the future. We're starting that work now in the region. We're currently re-inventorying the land base. Both ourselves and Canfor continue to be strong supporters of HASOC, the Hewlett Seed Orchard Company, and tree improvement programs, and are actively deploying that improved stock on the landscape, looking at, you know, increasing our utilization standards in the future, smaller tops, smaller stems. We might have to shift to different species even from a pulping viewpoint. I know Weyerhaeuser's got a list of about 20 specific projects that we're looking at. I'm sure Canfor's got the same list. So it's not an issue that we're waiting for the future to come to us. We're trying to get out in front of it. The third challenge that I see is decision making. And right now, we are making a bunch of decisions. We are setting a bunch of direction based on incomplete data. Our current approach is to do some risk management techniques. Which way would I rather be wrong? We, of course, look towards BC for their experience, both ourselves, Canfor, and actually Foothills as well as operations in BC, and we learn a lot from our colleagues there. Local first-hand observations of trends. I can't emphasize enough the importance of getting out and going up in a helicopter on an annual basis and flying the same piece of ground year after year after year after year to see what's going on at a landscape level with the beetle and learning from those trends. And then the last thing, and our BC counterparts really warned us that we would have to do this, is just when you thought you kind of had her figured out, you'll find out that you didn't, and you got to be willing to change on the fly and rethink the whole situation. So the final message that I have here, and this is the one as it relates to research, is for our region anyways, time really is of the essence. And any understanding that you folks as researchers can give us in the short term, even if it's an incomplete understanding, is better than us waiting a number of years until we actually have the answer 100% nailed.